Hi, I'm Sophie Day, one of the researchers on People Like You, and it's very exciting to see you all here in the flesh. People Like You, which is a project supported by the Wellcome Trust, investigates aspects of personalization. Our name comes from the well-known marketing address to you. People like you like things like this. This phrase employs two distinct forms of like. The first is resemblance or similarity, and the second is preference or choice or perhaps even purchase. Both resemblances and preferences can be sorted into relevant groups for a variety of purposes, from advertising to social media, public health, medical treatment, and grocery shopping. These two different likes, which I call liking and likeness, are explored in our first session, Portraits of People Like You. After lunch, we have two more sessions. The first looks at different histories and practices of personalization and similarities and differences between them, while the second asks about personalization's future. This last panel has a question time format, so do please submit any questions you'd like the panel to answer at the registration desk by the end of lunch. Now, it's my very great pleasure to introduce the first speaker this morning. Felicity Allen will present her new series of dialogic portraits, Figure to Ground, where she and those who had their portraits painted asked whether the watercolors you hopefully had a chance to look at briefly next door resemble their sitters and whether sitters like them. If I can just ask you also, with the artwork, we're not set up as a gallery, and so if you could be careful not to take drinks and food around the pictures, that would be great. You can also shortly see one of the portraits at the Royal Academy's summer exhibition, which is very exciting. Flick worked in film as well as watercolor and recorded conversations with her sitters in Figure to Ground, a site losing its system. She said of the possible links among these portraits, I pictured a game, dominoes, tops and tails following an assortment of different possible connections and lines of thought. Flick, over to you.
This is my sixth series of dialogic portraits, and the first with an academic research project. The picture on the left, on your left, is the one in the Royal Academy at the moment. The process I've developed is to make a minimum of 2 watercolour portraits of each sitter, usually taking 2 days. During the sitting, we talk, and over time, the talking has taken on different roles. For this series, I'd already become interested not just in the conversation, but also in how a sitter's face and body move as they talk. The portrait is made entirely in the studio with the sitter, and so the picture is both a portrait and a document of time spent together. In this sense, the watercolour has the potential to resemble duration, comparable with the real time of film, whereas the time associated with the photograph is usually of a moment whose time is defined by the historic age of the material or digital object, or what is pictured. At some point following the sittings, I make a recorded discussion with the sitter, and much later I'll extract recorded sentences to create a script of mixed dialogue for perhaps a film, or in this case, a book, or in this case, a film. There's an implicit question of power relations between the artist and the sitter. There's often a clear division. Either the artist is commissioned by a powerful person or institution, or the powerful artist sitter is their model, often anonymized. I consciously try to allow for power to shift between the sitter and me, to be alert to exchanges, to agency and dormancy, the energy between us. By incorporating the sitter's signature alongside mine, I symbolically acknowledge the sitter's labor. Working with people like you extended my thinking from power relations imbued in the individual gaze of a privileged artist to connect this to the intransigent and godlike oversight industrialized as surveillance. The role of dialogue or talk changes through the sitting. At first, it's to put us both at ease, because spending hours alone in a room looking at one another is a very intimate experience that most of us would only do as a parent to baby or as lovers. The conversations form a trail of thought between one sitter and the next, sometimes informing the development of the paintings. As well as the subject of personalization, in research project meetings, questions were raised about figures, series, sequence, multiplicity, lineage, physical displacement, bodily archives, and these discussions affected who I chose to invite to sit for me. I included people who were at the time classed as illegal immigrants, detained indefinitely by the British state, while also inviting a poet who happens to have a baronetcy passed down since the 17th century through the oldest males in his family. This led me to see portraiture as a material form of lineage, also accumulated and passed down through generations. Mobility and stability, which identify us as figures and as series, are not identified only by the face, but products associated with the face reveal our personalized status. When I talk to sitters about their relation to personalization and their data selves, they tended to think in terms of social media, although one sitter commented with bemused irritation about surveillance expressed as, for example, interruptions from Alexa or her mobile. Anecdotally and unsurprisingly, it seemed that experience or consciousness of racism affected one's alertness to the negative impacts of data gathering. However, most sitters with this consciousness didn't engage in recorded conversations about this. What does it feel like to be portrayed? People have quite different reactions, both to the sitting and to the pictures they see at the end, only at the end of each day. If you Google the word haptic, it takes you straight to ideas of touch and technology, as if technology is where touch lay. Of course, it's the lack of actual and felt touch that technology is perhaps trying to compensate for. By contrast, some years ago, a sitter commented when looking at her portrait, "When I see that, I can feel my face." Alternatively, sitters are occasionally so discomforted by sitting for me that they squirm, literally, with itchiness. One who felt this responded on first seeing the picture, "That's not me." Others have immediately and vehemently told me that they love the portrait. To a degree, the quality of the finished picture affects sitters' responses, but it's clear that there are many other unconscious factors. And what does it feel like to make a portrait? Frequently, the sense of the haptic is strong, the look of the touch, the feeling of the look. I am interested in how the touch of the brushstroke on the paper somehow stands in for stroking a face, which I wouldn't dream of touching in real life. I guess that this sensual metaphor has to be in play in order for a viewer to feel something from a picture. In this project, I've often thought of the brushstroke as a form of data, which builds a picture of a person. Watercolor lends itself to liquidity, which we read as sensual, while it's also alternatively a medium traditionally used for map making and illustration, that is, depiction rather than feeling. So what type of brushstroke most resembles data, and whose data is it, the sitter's or mine? The hand of the artist is seen as expressive, the gestural mark, the expression. A sitter once said, seeing the portrait series that she was a part of, that she felt she'd joined a family of portraits because of the shared look of them. Throughout this series, I have been thinking about the face as a common site both for portraiture and digital innovations, whether as selfies for social media or facial recognition as a form of policing. I had expected to explore this in recorded discussion with sitters to contribute to the film I plan to make. I'm affected by what I've read while working reflexively from practice rather than producing work as a result of study. I'm also working with and affected by the atmosphere and physical elements around me, most obviously the quality of daylight at the time of painting. Again, I'm affected by geopolitical conditions when I was making preparatory work for the film, a regular leading item on television news concerned the demonstrations for human rights in Hong Kong. The face took on an increasingly symbolic role in relation to human rights as masks to counter-facial recognition surveillance made visually explicit the challenge of the demonstrators, countered by laws making masks illegal. Gradually, the leading news crossed from Hong Kong to China's pandemic, and as the virus travelled, the face, the vulnerability of its openings to transmit and receive the virus, and its relation to masks also became news. Because it was such a focus of news, I felt the face itself, whether masked or unmasked, became too topical to become an explicit issue in the film. When you see the paintings in the film, they have been through 3 degrees of digital separation from the originals. First, they're photographed, then the digital photographs are incorporated into the digital film, and then the digital film runs through a digital projector. The ease of not realizing the difference between the original and the filmed, in which distinctions of texture and scale are jettisoned, color and tone are smoothed, is something I hope might suggest itself to the film's viewers. Frequently, even those professionally involved in making pictures slip into referring to the filmed or photographed person as a real version, as opposed to the unreal painting. Just as I've tried to unsettle representation and defining the other, apparently made easy by cameras and television, so I've tried to avoid reproducing voices as vox pop. Instead, I think of poetry's composite spoken phrases. I want the failure or limitations of making a representation of a person to be clear. Scott Walk, one of my colleagues in People Like You, and many of the colleagues have contributed in different ways, picked up on someone in the film saying, it's a piece of work trying to be a person. He equated this with a sense of intentional inadequacy inherent in the portraits and the film. The pandemic clarified for me the initial tendency for politicians to speak with certainty about data as a form of prediction. It led me to think that the failures to adequately represent through portraiture may possibly be analogous with the failures to adequately predict through data. And I'd like to just show you the film now.
Well,
Well,
how was it for all of you?
sitting.
Sitting.
With the caravan, we'd go over to France. We would take the hovercraft rather than go on the ferry. This would have been in the late 80s. I vividly remember that space. I remember the cars parked there. I remember the excitement. I remember the sound of it. That feeling when you kind of lift off the ground. And it felt futuristic, and it made Europe feel futuristic. Connectivity through science or through technology.
You are doing a portrait of me having encountered portraits of some of my male Hall ancestors.
I feel sometimes the two me's. There's the me that everyone else is familiar with. She wears makeup, she goes to the hairdresser and has her hair dyed, who's quite social. And then there's the hermit, which is me in the woods, actually.
I remember my mother saying, well, you know, if people wanted to send me back, where would they send me back to? Because I'm made up of 3 different continents. I've lived through that moment where you've been politically black, and then it's suddenly I've become Afro-Caribbean, which isn't a term that I would describe to myself. I would always say that I was of Caribbean descent.
I do make an effort not to have my portrait made. If you Google me, you will find very few portraits of me circulating on the internet.
But it had been my policy not to have any images of myself on the internet.
As a photographer, whenever I look at photographs of myself, instantly I recoil in horror.
I really like the portrait, and my daughter really likes it.
Photographic portraits always fail for me, unless they're operating like a passport photograph.
There are conventions, it's a construction, genealogy constructed, favouring the older male. The James, who's sitter in the Reynolds painting, was president of the Royal Society.
The shirt I was wearing was actually part of a suit my mother had. And it's one of the things I took from a wardrobe when we were sorting out her clothes.
I've got a print, but the ribbon I've never seen and would love to. Oh, I'm pretty sure it's in the States, yes. Privately bought.
I always wore the skirt, and then my daughter always wore the shirt. So the shirt is actually almost a kind of three-generational image.
As so often with honours, they were part of the economy of the time. Everybody had to earn their knighthood, and that was the point. You're honouring a family forever, and so well worth the investment, isn't it?
How we construct our sense of self is so much tied to how other people construct us.
I recognised the person, but I didn't recognise them as me. I thought they were someone I might have met once.
And if you're honest with yourself, you know that trying to be a person is a piece of work.
My father is a painter.
My sister's in New York.
My mom made sure my dad get a quota.
But my brother's in Baton Rouge.
The whole China is still running by the idea of quota.
I'm not going to be able to go home. In Mexico. I mean, at least we have technology.
I made a life-size copy of myself called Dolly. Dolly and I had an art practice together using Dolly as a proxy. I wanted to have her replace me. Neither of us were in the image at all anymore. The work was just authored by both of us.
The Amy Bird alias, she only makes clay women in a class because she likes the democracy of the class, where people are from different kind of backgrounds, of experiences, and she really only functions for a few hours a week.
Someone you'd met from China, you invited them accidentally to stay with you, and then upon inviting them realised that it was actually a different person.
Almost everywhere I remember disappeared. The road, the trees, everything. It's like totally erased. And then they rebuilt everything on top of it. They chop off mountains. Rivers, trees, there were many trees. They're gone. Just high-rise real estate.
When I was a kid, we were branded at that time as kind of illegal, and that's why they are demolishing our houses. Refugees is not genetic, you know. And it's true, no human is illegal. And you can have that brand. I mean, I had it because of my tribes and because of the color of my skin. We are not the cause of injustice. We're born into it.
What we need in the border force is data.
If it's not in the camps,
we've got a very good targeting centre in this country.
And it's in the prisons.
Obviously, additional data will come in.
If it's not in the prisons,
good intelligence data sharing platforms.
And it's somewhere else we can't even identify.
When people think about you as data, they kind of think that it's the data outside of the person. And so it becomes depersonalized.
No one is an average.
This wave of data that somehow represents everything about humans. Quite like, there's a kind of beauty in that. But then you think about, well, who's got this data and do you trust them?
The internet in general is energy consuming. The more images, the less valuable they are. We are definitely losing a lot of visceral connection with those images. The amount of videos being stored and the data being stored is quite mad.
At the end of that technology is a human being.
So there's a very famous image where the overseer, the landscape of the Caribbean is produced in some ways that at all times the overseer can see the enslaved activity.
We developed a kind of sense of Flick's facial repertoire and a fairly clear sense for when the painting was going well and in her opinion and when it wasn't going so well in her opinion.
So did you get comments along the way? Because I had Flick would comment, and at one point she said, "Oh, I'm making you look like John Prescott." That was the one that I remember thinking.
Really?
No, yeah.
Yeah, I got comments along the way about bits that weren't working, or bits about my face that were difficult to capture.
Well, that was something as well that I hadn't really thought about, was how she is obviously, and she can't be unique in this, but she is trying to capture something that is in motion.
Yeah.
While you're sat there being still,
yeah,
you are still in motion.
Yeah.
Because it is capturing that movement. And particularly for doing multiple portraits as she's doing, then you can see that difference, almost like you're literally painting a different person.